You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking about 1988's horror creature feature, Pumpkinhead. Here we go. All right, shall we go into a little Pumpkinhead?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, you're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez. With me today, fellow co-host Pete Charbonneau. We have a special guest for this episode, Megan, who's chosen a movie that made a big impact for her at some point, and we'll find out why. We're talking about 1988's Pumpkinhead.
From a world of fear and darkness comes a creature so monstrous, no one dares speak its name.
Can't you call it off?
Nothing can call it off. Pumpkinhead, rated R.
Starts Friday, October.
Megan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right, you picked the horror creature feature cult classic directed by Stan Winston, probably better known for doing creature effects for Predator, Alien, and Die Hard. He also did direct a movie called Gnome Named Norm with Anthony Michael Hall, but we don't need to talk about that one. But just to get the conversation going, why did you pick Pumpkinhead? Why did it make such an impact on you that you wanted to talk about it?
Probably has to do with the fact that I was maybe 6 max when I was shown Pumpkinhead. Maybe 6. That might be generous. Probably the same age as a small boy who dies in the very beginning. So I definitely was brought into this one far too young.
Wow. Okay.
Was this a older brother that inflicted this upon you?
This would be my dad.
Your dad. Okay.
Yeah.
Good parenting there.
Oh, yeah. No.
1988.
Yeah, I vividly recall working on a bunny puzzle when it was then all of a sudden lights out and Pumpkinhead was on. So clearly, this was definitely the perfect time to have been like, yep, you're old enough. Let's watch demonic pumpkins murder teenagers. Yeah.
So was it, you said lights out, was it like a home rental? Was it cable?
I would assume it would have to be home rental. I know that we had VCR really early on. So I remember there being a lot of movies. So I would assume that this was something we watched at home. It wasn't anything I saw in theaters. I probably should have been told, maybe you should do your puzzle somewhere else.
Were you or your family folks who would go to the video store, whether it was Blockbuster, Hollywood Family Video, or a mom and pop, rent movies, have like some sort of a ritual, rent movies on like a Friday night or a weekend or something like that?
Yeah, so I definitely, once I was old enough to really remember doing it, I know we went to Blockbuster a lot, but there was something before that with some sort of very small video store that I only have a little bit of memory of. But yes, it was definitely one that there were often go pick up a bunch of movies, have some sort of frozen pizza, and watch them.
This Halloween, after the kids are done trick-or-treating and are safely tucked away in their bed, it's time to get scared. Come on down to Fan2Fan Vids, where for the whole month of October, rent 2 frightfully good films, get the third one free. Come browse our latest and scariest selection of VHS rentals, and remember, don't be afraid of no ghosts. Fan2Fan Vids, make it a Fan2Fan fright.
Nice. Were you allowed to like pick the movies on your own, or did you get another older sibling kind of elbowing their way in to try to get their picks in?
Probably it would have depended on who it went with. If it was my mom, then we probably are all picking out something. And if it was my dad, it was probably I picked these for us. None of them were appropriate for children, but they're for all of us.
And by us, I mean myself.
Yes. And if you can work on your puzzle in the dark, you're welcome to stay.
There you go.
Pumpkinhead left an indelible mark on your 6-year-old psyche. I have to imagine that you've since revisited it because you watched it so young and it left that mark, that you've gone back a few times since to maybe uncover a little bit more of why it got under your skin so much, or
for watching it really little. And I can remember seeing Pumpkinhead, and I remember knowing about the boy dying. I don't remember being traumatized, so I don't know if that says good things or bad things about me. We'll see. It's one that I've thought about a lot. And every time it comes up, I'm like, oh, I watched that when I was little. Should probably watch that again.
Pete, you mentioned before Jaws and how you might have been a bit too young to maybe watch that, and you kind of watched that from underneath a blanket. Are there other movies that you have that recollection for where, you have that palpable moment of saying, yeah, I was probably too young to watch it and it left Pumpkinhead like scars in your psyche?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It was between my parents and my cousins taking me to the drive-in when I was way too young. So yeah, Jaws and Jaws 2. Saw both of those in the drive-in. Should not have. but they were rated PG. So I guess my parents were like, oh, how bad could it be? Turns out, pretty bad. No, actually, I can't say that. I mean, it gave me a lifelong love of sharks, like I think it did a lot of people. So I turned out okay. But yeah, I remember my cousins taking me to see this movie, The Island, with Michael Caine, another early 80s. It might have been another Peter Benchley novel. And it's basically about modern day pirates, and they kidnap Michael Caine's son and basically brainwash him. And it's very violent. It gets, it's just like total carnage. I don't remember much about it, to be honest with you, because it was another one. I was literally in the back of a station wagon hiding my eyes because I was terrified. And they would do that often. So any movie from like late 70s, early 80s that, should not have been seen. I think the Frank Langella Dracula was another one, which I think might be pretty tame if I were to watch it now. But again, when you're 5 years old, it's a little different. And plus my cousins absolutely loved scaring the shit out of us younger cousins. So, it wasn't just the fact that we were seeing it. It was like them making comments and, and kind of just ramping up the fear. One of them would sneak out of the car in the drive-in and start like shaking the station wagon. And my other cousins were like, oh my God, what's that? So now I'm terrified of, someone's going to come in, like some killer's going to come into the station wagon and kill us all. So that was my childhood in a nutshell.
Oh, yeah, just to make sure it was traumatic on all the levels.
That's right. That's right. Pete, do you remember watching Pumpkinhead at some point either in the 80s or maybe, later on as you were, kind of picking out movies for yourself?
For anyone that's ever listened to the podcast, I will once again mention my ubiquitous cousin Mark, because this was a rental probably right after, I don't know, Pumpkinhead had a very long stay in theaters, but this was like, once it hit video, I remember he and I renting this until we talked to Megan about, having her come on to talk about Pumpkinhead. I haven't seen it since. It was one of those that I remember seeing it, remember renting it, remember being like, okay, and just kind of forgetting about it and not having a burning desire to revisit it. But to see it again ahead of the podcast, and I think I texted you the other day, Bernie, like there were several double takes that I did with some people that are in this movie that, obviously when I saw it back in 88 or 89, went completely over my head. We'll get into it. I may fanboy out a little bit on it. I'm sure anyone that has an appreciation or a love for Pumpkinhead will be like, well, yeah, no, of course. But hey, tough shit. I just noticed this for the first time the other day. So
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So it had been a long number of years since I had seen it, and I'm very glad to have spent some time with it again. What about you?
I saw it, again, during that kind of binge watching that I did when I was in college. And it kind of makes sense because it's, I think it's an underrated creature feature, but I think it also gets lost between a lot of the more synonymous with the 80s horror slasher type films. And when I went back, because, I just like to always look at context, like it kind of makes sense because to your point, Pete, like you and your cousin Mark would not have been able to maybe even see this in the theaters because it had such a limited theatrical run to begin with. So I think the discovery for most people, including your dad, Megan, would have been on VHS, home video, on cable. Because going back to like 1988, some of the big guns that are out there, Naked Gun, Beetlejuice, Coming to America, Die Hard, Heather. So that's what most people are watching in theaters. But when you think about horror, you get the remake of The Blob, Child's Play, Halloween 4, Monkey Shines, Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, and Critters 2. So you're starting to get a lot of these horror franchises that are getting way past number 2, number 3, in Friday the 13th into Part 7. So you have long-standing franchises. You have movies like Child's Play that then would create franchises after this. And then mixed in that group picture is Pumpkinhead, directorial debut for Stan Winston. And you figure at the time, none of us, except for, I guess, maybe folks who picked up Starlog or Fangoria would know who Stan Winston was. It's not until later when, you start seeking out this information that you start like, oh, you connect dots, Stan Winston, why do I know that name? Oh, he worked on Predator. Oh, he also worked on Terminator. This is cool. Like, I'm starting to understand a bit about the behind the curtain of film production. And then to find out that this was his film, it's interesting. And then throwing on top of that, a favorite of ours, Megan, are you a fan of Evil Dead 2?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Sam Raimi, the director of The Evil Dead. I've invited Jonathan Ross to see my new movie, Evil Dead 2.
Oh, I don't believe this.
Say, you think this will scare the audience as much as the first one?
Yeah, that's a safe bet, Sam. It's got a lot more surprises.
Oh, yeah, it's got a lot in it to grab the audience.
There's only one movie scarier than The Evil Dead. Evil Dead 2. Kiss your nerves goodbye.
De Laurentiis makes a good amount of money on Evil Dead 2. They decide to lean in on horror films because, it's a pretty good bet to make if you're a film production company, small budget, pretty potential big return. They go into production on this movie that originally was named Vengeance the Demon. Fortunately, they renamed it to the name of the poem it was based on, which was Pumpkinhead. They reach out to Stan Winston really just to bring him on to do the creature effects, but he likes the concept, the idea so much. He's like, hey, I'm in, but I'm in as a director. And then, he brings in a bunch of his buddies to work on the creature effects, but then it becomes his debut. So I think that's where, like, watching the movie again for this conversation, learning more about it, it becomes very overshadowed and underrated. And the only category I can kind of put it in is a movie that Pete and I kind of discovered for the first time recently was Tremors, where it's not a slasher. It's not a movie that has comedy like Night of the Creeps or Fright Night, where it's like, oh, it's funny, but there's also moments of violence. It's closer to Tremors, where it's a creature feature, but it's not a straight up creature feature, and it's certainly not funny to sit down at 6-year-old. Sorry, Becky. Like, wow.
Like, did 5.
Oh, there you go. Like, watching it now, I'm like, wow, there's some, like, the movie is pretty intense. And like you said, if the memories are a little clearer from the beginning, that's really before Pumpkinhead goes on a rampage. But even before that, that moment where you see a kid who is probably not that much older than you were watching the movie bite it because of a bunch of rampaging, dirt biking city kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I feel like for as intricate as the creature design is, that if I had seen it at all, that had to have been something that would have stayed with me. Like the first version of him before he really starts into the mutating closer and closer to his human counterpart is on the cusp of a memory, but definitely not anything that I could say, okay, yeah, I saw the creature design. And looking at it now, I'm like, oh, that would have to have been something that I would have retained. But it was fantastic. And it holds up so well.
I think that's where, like, the visual memory of Pumpkinhead doesn't look like a werewolf or something humanoid like a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. And it's got all of those organic elements where it's got those, like, demon type legs. And, and as much as it looks almost alien like, it's really a demon. It seems to jump up really well. So it's also somewhat like lithe and capable of moving. It hunts the kids. So there's some sense of awareness. Like, it's not like a golem type creature where it's like Terminator, one track mind, zombie, incapable of really kind of like, oh, if you put a car in the middle, it's like, well, it'll try to go through it. But if not, you can kind of stop it. No, it's capable of setting traps. So there's a lot of things about it that I think make it incredibly unique. And in those cases, like, I think that's what makes it memorable outside of like the silhouette. When you think of like graphic design and trying to create something that's memorable, you can put it with like those really cool backlighting with the fog. And if you just saw it moving, oh yeah, that's totally Pumpkinhead. Even if you just had a few memories of the movie or maybe have never seen it, it's at least well known enough now where you're like, oh, it's that one with the big creature that's like the pumpkin. It's like, yeah, that's it. You got it.
Yeah.
Plus it comes with its very own sound effect where you've got like this kind of like cicada buzzing of wings, legs, whatever, however cicadas make their noises, that like anytime it's like being introduced.
It's their butt cheeks, Pete. It's the butt cheeks. It's the butt cheeks.
It's the butt cheeks? Oh.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, the insect world is fascinating. Like they're rubbing all appendages together.
Twerking before it was cool.
Yeah, that's right. In Pumpkinhead, the story of the twerking cicadas.
Yes,
right.
naturally. That was the subtitle.
I'm
I
sure.
think that's what drew Lance Henriksen into the whole role.
I think that's it. Yes. Although I always remember an anecdote that Lance Henriksen shared much older in his career, where he talked about how sometimes it's okay to take a movie to pay for the addition or the swimming pool that you want to put in your home. Movie's not great, but you still need a swimming pool. And I appreciated him for his candor. I was like, you know what? Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. It also explains why you were in Pumpkinhead 3 and 4, but we'll get to that later.
And hey, hats off to Lance Henriksen getting the rare starring role, well known for being, a consummate character actor, always like supporting roles. And obviously he was offered and ran with the lead here. So his presence helps this movie, in my opinion, because the script can get a little dicey at times, but he's so good. And he's got great chemistry with the kid that plays his son until he meets his untimely demise. And so
a little bit after.
That's true.
Yeah, a little bit after. Yeah, there's that little bit like Pet Cemetery, like, Daddy, why are you doing this? And I had the same question. I feel like there were some choices that he could have made. He made a different one, but I guess if he doesn't, then we don't have a movie. So, he knew what he was doing on some level.
Let's get into the cast, Pete, because you saw a lot of names, a lot of familiar faces. Lance Henriksen, easy one, right? Aliens Near Dark. There was that Millennium TV show, which was kind of like a spinoff of X-Files. Character actor, genre actor for sure. I started going through IMDb. There's a few names that I saw that seemed to be familiar, but I think, Pete, you had more hits on your radar.
All right, well, we'll go chronologically. So first one that I was just like, holy shit. The opening scene where, a lot of horror movies will do this, but, they kind of open up on, something's happening. Like there's that sense of foreboding. And you've got like the opening scene where like the family's barricaded in their home and, there's a guy running through the cornfield and he's trying to get in and like we can't help him. Well, that guy is none other than Dick Warlock, who played the Shape in Halloween 2. Credited in this as Richard Warlock, which
Yes.
like I've never heard him referred to as Richard Warlock before, but that's kind of funny. I don't know if that was his decision or whoever was just typing in the credits, but we're like, oh, that's pretty cool. And you don't get to see Dick Warlock do a whole lot of acting because he's a stuntman by trade. Behind the Mask in Halloween 2, he's one of the robots in Halloween 3. So again, not doing a whole lot of emoting. Does a lot of emoting in his brief scene here before Pumpkinhead takes him off to the netherworld.
Thus the name Richard, Pete, because he knew this was his real full acting debut.
That's right.
Let's be serious now.
I am a thespian. You will refer to me as Richard Warlock.
That's right.
It's also going to roll the R for Richard. That was only fitting.
I definitely did not remember that when I saw that in 1988. Oh, so then, you get introduced to, of course, you got to introduce a group of teens, although these are probably more like 20-somethings. I don't know if they were supposed to be teens. I don't think so. That would be kind of awkward because none of them look like teenagers.
Although it would fit with every 80s movie we saw with like 20 to maybe arguably 30-year-olds cast in the role of high schoolers and college age kids.
Yes. And if they had done that, I mean, that would have been funny. And it's certainly been done before. I'm sure it will be done again because of casting. But like you said, Bernie, like this, there's really no humor to be found in this movie. This is like straight like Southern Gothic horror, and it's it doesn't really let up. It doesn't get lighthearted much at all. But yeah, you got this 20-something. They're out in the country. They're a couple of, I guess, professional dirt bike racers. So among the crew, and again, like if you're a huge fan of Pumpkinhead, none of this will be a surprise to you. But again, please indulge my excitement. You got one of the characters, Chris. Played by Jeff East, and not a name that's going to like ring a lot of bells, but I was looking at this guy. I'm like, I've seen him somewhere before. And then it clicked in. This was young Clark Kent in 1978 Superman, most likely wearing a very dark wig in Superman because his hair, kind of like a blonde curly perm in this, is clearly nothing like his character.
I always remember the scene with the train where he's kind of running.
Yes,
and
exactly.
That scene is just talk about memories and scenes burned in my brain. Young Superman. Got it. There we go. Train scene, of course.
John DeCino plays like the supreme asshole of the crew who no redeeming qualities to this guy whatsoever. Like, he's the one that hits Lance Henriksen's son that ends up killing him. He flees the scene because he's got a prior DUI or some alcohol related incidents where he's like, I can't get caught again. Beats his friends, locks them in a closet, like does all sorts of shitty thing. Like
that's what friends are for.
Yes. Right, yeah. friends like these. Who needs a dirt bike? But played by John D'Aquino, might be better known as Todd Gack from Seinfeld.
Yeah, and he was in like every 90s show that I remember watching in high school. Mantis, Sequest, DSV, Renegade, because I loved me some Renegade as a kid, as a teenager. Sure. That was a great show. But he was always like on all of those shows. Like, like he was like even on like Matlock and Murder, She Wrote. He had one of those faces that you always saw on a show on TV in the late 80s into the 90s. So glad the man had a good career.
Yeah,
that's right.
And then George Buck Flower playing one of the mountain people. Always a welcome sight to see him. Was in a bunch of John Carpenter films. Always a good time having him on screen. And then the other big one was, I was like, holy shit, it's fucking Blossom. Mayim Bialik, a very young Mayim Bialik playing
that's right.
The young kids that kind of comes to the store that Lance Henriksen runs, the little market. And then they're teasing one of the kids. They kind of do a little, Pumpkinhead's going to get you. It reminded me very much of the scene in Halloween where the kids are kind of taunting Tommy Wallace, like, the boogeyman's going to get you.
That's right.
Coming. So it was very reminiscent of that. But I was like, holy shit, Blossom is in this movie.
Jimmy Joe, you done bad. Y'all know what settles on bad ones, don't you?
Pumpkinhead. Pumpkinhead? Y'all stop. There ain't no Pumpkinhead. What about old Mr. Foley? He moved away. Pumpkinhead got it.
Teared off his head and drank all the blood.
Did not. Did too. Shut up, Hesse.
Keep away from Pumpkinhead unless you're tired of living.
His enemies are mostly dead. He's mean and unforgiving. Stop it!
Bolted doors and windows barred. Guardians prowling in the yard. Won't protect you till you're dead. Just away from Pumpkinhead. So keep away from Pumpkinhead.
Stop it! Stop it!
I sat back in my chair and just like, I'm like, Pumpkinhead, just take me away. Do what you will. I'm on board.
Horror movie bingo. That's it right there. You mentioned Southern Gothic, which perfect way to describe this, Pete, because I think that and the chant that those kids are yelling at the kid Billy, I think that like brings it together where Southern Gothic, urban legend, creature feature, kind of putting that all together is kind of really doing the heavy lifting for like the tone of the movie. Now, having seen it, Megan, how did it land? The mileage varies, practical effects, the movie's 30 plus years old. What'd you think?
Well, first, the chant. Isn't the chant the actual Pumpkinhead poem? Or am I wrong about that?
I believe so, yeah.
I thought that was the actual poem. And I could be totally wrong, but I remembered knowing that when I saw it again. I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the poem, which would be brilliant. I mean, it's a super disturbing poem. And then the way they're chanting
especially coming from Blossom. Just throw that out there.
This is true.
Remember, you can find the Fan2Fan Podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan2Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN.
On Instagram at Fan2Fan Podcast.
Or on Twitter at Fan2Fan Podcast.
We'd love to hear from you, so send a message and let us know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
So what'd you think, Megan?
I liked it. I thought it did a good job. I thought what it was cool was to watch the change in the creature as it evolved through different things. I liked that it started very much creature, very alien with the very long sloping skull, that its movements in the beginning were very demonic in that it wasn't human at all for things. And I liked that as kills went on, it became very much more human to the point that it had a human face and its hands weren't that super, super long fingers and creepy. And it started behaving more like a human hunting humans instead of a creature hunting humans. So I thought that was cool to watch. I thought that it also definitely hit on a lot of the tropes. Even though they're in I assume the Appalachian area, that there's a swamp and there's quintessential witch hag lady that lives in the swamp that knows how to summon demons and do all this black magic, voodoo, everything. So I was just like, oh, we found all the tropes. The family that some reason has every child imaginable, lives in the backwoods, but owns a flashlight. Everything else in their house was lit up with a candle except that one boy had a flashlight. And I was like, why do you have a flashlight? No one else here uses a flashlight. Where do you get your batteries from? So that was one of the things that was fun to like poke fun at the things that are very much a cliche. But then the design of the creature was phenomenal. So I thought it was both perfect for watching for the nostalgic of saying, I remember these parts, for watching the creature design, for the parts that are not funny in that this was meant to be laughed at, but one of those where you're like, okay, I see you. Trope. I appreciate what you're doing here. It was a good time. It definitely was different than I think I was expecting it to be, though, too.
You did not remember the ending at all. What was that like, kind of experiencing and being like, oh, this is what happens, having that kind of be almost like a blank slate for you from when you were younger?
So I liked that it kind of it flipped things on its head. The first 20-something-year-old to die was the one I thought would have been the last one alive. So I was like, oh, okay, well, there goes everything I thought was going to happen. But then I liked the ultimate ending of her burying his body with the necklace that shows you who he is, and that you watch the creature slowly become his exact face. So then it was kind of interesting to think back and say, okay, if the beginning one only killed one person, was that body that was put back very creature? Does it always make it to a human? Is it more kills the closer it gets to a human? If it's around and takes out 20 people, does it end up really human where it's just somebody that can be like, yes, I can absolutely pass. So it was fun to look back at it that way. I liked that it was also one of those where you're like, okay, if you are messing with something that is a demonic in nature, revenge driven and everything, that there isn't really an end to it, that it really is something that it's just a matter of time. You're burying it, you're not killing it. So I liked that it ended on that note of, this probably isn't the last time this happens, because this is something built on rage and anger and the desire for revenge and evil. And you're not going to just be like, yep, I've run my course. I've found peace and I'm fine now. Everything's
right. It's not like, the demon gets a shopping list of like the names that it has to go like track down. It's just like, do you want revenge? Yes, I want revenge. Yeah. Like, well, okay. Yeah. And then the demon will kill basically anything that comes in its path. It's not like it's just targeting, it kind of is, but like, Lance Henriksen's not like, I want this person dead and that person dead and that, like, it's just like, you're setting loose this force. And I think the witch kind of understands, probably because she's been doing this for a number of years, that at some point the person that has come to her seeking the revenge is going to realize, much like Lance Henriksen does, that he's made a huge mistake. And the only way to really stop things is by doing the ultimate sacrifice, which of course then dooms him to take on the mantle and become, I guess, the next Pumpkinhead. So yeah, they're very, very interesting. I did think when he first digs up a little pumpkin,
the pumpkin pod,
little pod. When little pumpkin like first comes back to life, I'm like, oh, that's a really cute little little baby, and it grows up real fast.
Yes. I think that's where like the tropes you were mentioning, Megan, because the tropes that we're used to with the 80s slashers, in some ways, because you're expecting the teenagers to die and all the rules that are kind of, done in like meta tongue in cheek in Scream, it's because those rules are so tried and true that we're used to them. And I think that's where like all those tropes from those movies overshadow the stuff that this movie I think is trying to do. And I don't know if it does it successfully, but I think that's where it also could be Stan Winston doing a really good job on the practical side, right? Like, it's a good looking movie. It sounds right. The casting is great. Certainly the creature effects, but it is a little, it kind of hammers you with the idea of the revenge and the cyclical nature. And especially the comment you were making, like with the creature then becoming the human, and how Lance Henriksen, his character Ed, kind of realizes that he started this and only he can end it. So there's a lot of stuff there that is not, it doesn't have a lot of nuance. Like it's pretty obvious, what's going on. Maybe that's some of the stuff that hurts it, but also those are the things that separate it from those slasher films. Because outside of Jason getting resurrected, it's like, yes, he's going to come back. We get it. He's not going to die. This one seems to have some stuff going. There's some stuff there that I think in some ways it's because Lance Henriksen does such a good job being like the mourning father that even with the sledgehammer that is revenge is bad, vengeance is bad, and there are consequences. Even with the, hey, we're still going to lean a little bit into the out-of-town kids that cause mischief accidentally, but still kill someone. And then even throw in all the black magic, swamp witch sprinkles on top of it. I think Lance Henriksen is trying to do something. It just never goes into like full gear.
I agree. I think one of the things that I don't want to be like too critical. I mean, it at its heart, it's a B movie. And like you said, Bernie, it looks really good for a B movie. And again, first time direction from Stan Winston. I don't think a ton of his shots. I mean, I would call it very workmanlike. So there's not like a lot of shots where you're like, ooh, well composed, looks better than I'm sure what its budget was, for sure. It's got that going in its favor. I think story-wise, it probably could have used maybe a few more passes or some polish. I was scratching my head when his son dies, and I was expecting a little more of the anguish from Lance Henriksen, maybe a little more time to pass where he's just like, he just can't deal with the fact that his son has died. And it seems to be like a really quick, because you don't know about this witch other than like he's, as a young child, observed like Pumpkinhead when he was little. So he knows that there's something out there that might be able to help him with the revenge, but he like immediately goes to that. Yes. And I was like, they're not going to waste 5 or 10 minutes to kind of flesh this stuff out. It's going to be like hour and 20, hour and 30. So let's just keep things going. So I get the decisions that were made, but I felt it robbed it a little bit of some of that emotional power that it might have needed, especially because it is so serious. Like there's not a lot of lightness to this movie. It's just very like, it gets very heavy. So I would have liked to see a little bit more of that emotion. But, again, like that's a minor criticism that I had of it.
That workman thing you mentioned, I think that's where that intro scene, which doesn't last very long, but seems to last longer than I ever remembered it lasting watching it now. You can almost imagine, and no disrespect to Stan Winston, directorial debut out of the gate compared to a lot of stuff that was released in the 80s and into the early 90s that was either direct to cable, direct to home video. This is like shoulders taller, better than a lot of that stuff that we saw. But I think that those are the times where like you can almost see the checklist. Lance Henriksen's character is going to refer back to this memory from his youth. So we show that scene. We have to, like, that's like, we're going to have to refer to that later. So let's show that in the beginning. And I wonder if they could have leaned more into Lance Henriksen and maybe taking some time with the morning. I don't know, something there. And then, I mean, the other part of it is that just supposed to be another movie? It's like, sorry, guys, in the end, this is like a 10-foot tall pumpkin type creature. So sure. We got to get to that, right? Like, come on now. Like, that's really what people are coming to see. That they're not coming to see a dad mourning the loss of his kid. They're coming to see the big old creature.
And I guess you could also take, if you're playing like devil's advocate for it, if you assume that these out-of-towners are in presumably for a weekend for a short amount of time, you can make the argument, how long do I have to make the decision to sig some local monster
good point
on them kind of thing. So you could pretend that maybe it's in a normal setting if they were just kids in town where you're like, they live here, they're always here. At some point I could decide but I could see it being, this is temporary. They're going to leave, they're going to go back to their lives, they're going to do whatever they want, and they're not going to be punished for this. So I'm going to make this rash, too quick of a decision where you did not watch the thought process, you don't see the grieving, you don't see all of that, to say it has to be made now or it's not made.
No, that's a great point.
And it's not the first take I would take from it. I would agree where you're like, yeah, it's probably the case of fleshing out his storyline and giving him that level of humanity first isn't what you're looking for in a movie that has a Pumpkinhead demon.
Right. Yeah. I think it's always good to kind of check yourself when you start, criticizing some decisions that are made in movies like this, to be like, okay, so what I'm looking for more emotion from a movie called Pumpkinhead.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Yeah. And that's a good point about the kids, because they're the trope of the out-of-towners, right? The interlopers, they're not supposed to be here. And that makes them even more susceptible to a culture, to people who have beliefs and, have urban legends like Pumpkinhead that they may have like peripherally believed in, or maybe heard about it when they were a kid. In Lance Henriksen's character's case. So you almost have a little less sympathy for them because, one, the guy has a DUI, so he has a bit of a checkered past. Two, they're acting like dumb teenagers in these types of movies would act. So after they do something terrible, as in killing a kid, I'm like kind of okay with Pumpkinhead, the creature, like going on a homicidal spree to kill them. I'm still siding with Lance Henriksen the whole time. I don't want anyone to die, but if it's going to be anyone, it should be those kids who are staying in the same cabin, I guess, that was used in Friday the 13th Part 4. Just throwing that out there.
Throw that out there. I'm like,
oh, wow.
Because you talk about the connective tissue to slasher movies. I'm like, well, there's actual real connective tissue to this.
There we go. Yes. So that's where I'm like, I think the movie has some stuff going on. But again, mileage varies. Now, having seen it, Megan, is it a movie that I think, because we've talked about The Thing, and that's a movie that you have seen recently, and you said you would kind of revisit that. There are themes in that movie, ambiguity, paranoia, isolation, that are maybe broader themes that kind of beg you to revisit it because you haven't seen everything. And the first time you're kind of like taking it all in.
It's not one I would seek out to sit and watch, most likely. The creature design of Pumpkinhead is fantastic. That's one that I think is phenomenal and looks really cool. But for the whole thing, I don't know that there's as much, like with referencing The Thing, where there's more layers to take from it and more to look at and more to appreciate. I kind of feel like the cursory glance kind of got you 90% of it. From there, I think it would be into visuals. And the visuals for coming back to The Thing, I think would have been something that I would have done a couple passes down the line, whereas this one I'd be like, okay, if I'm watching it again, it's probably to say, oh, this color, like you were saying, Pete, the color palette is beautiful here. I like this dynamic. I like that they use these tones to suggest that these people don't have anything. Whereas the out-of-towners come in with bright colors and they don't fit in with anything just visually. Right away, they could have said nothing, showed up without dirt bikes, and I'd be like, you're not from here. You don't fit in here. The children that get out of the back of the pickup truck, exact same color palette, all exactly the same tone, the same level of dirty. It's one that I don't think I'd say, I really feel like watching Pumpkinhead. I'm going to put this on. But it's one that if somebody was like, hey, I want to watch this, I'd be like, okay, I'll watch it with you kind of thing. But it's not one that I'd say there's enough to be like, I'm going to get the craving to watch it again. But I would not avoid it by any means.
Now, I have not seen any of the sequels. I believe there might be 3 or 4. A couple of them be direct to streaming or video.
Yep.
But
Blood Wings, 1994, that was direct to video. And then there were the 2 Sci-Fi Channel original movies that did actually star Lance Henriksen. So, maybe one was the addition to the home and the other one was the swimming pool.
So that being said, based on having seen this again recently, do the sequels have any appeal to you, to find out, does the story go anywhere? Or are you kind of just like, I'm happy with just leaving it at Pumpkinhead one?
I probably wouldn't seek it out to say, okay, I've seen this, I want to see where it goes, do all of that. So it's not one that I think to me has anything that's going to be a surprise to warrant seeking them out directly. It's not like I'd say, no, Pumpkinhead's perfect and I don't want to ruin it with anything. I'm sure there are things that are done better, that if this was his directorial debut where you're like, okay, in a second one, you probably have a better I'm not saying he did Pumpkinhead too, but where you're like, okay,
just again, Megan, for the record, his second time was the gnomed name.
Oh, yeah.
With
but we weren't talking about that.
Just saying.
Do not utter that name again, Bernie.
That's right. Sorry.
So no, it's not one that I think that I would immediately be like, I got so much from this one that I think I would pursue it. I think the things that were most impressive to me were the creature design. And I feel like it can get gimmicky quickly, or the exact same thing. I'm like, oh, well, I could have just watched the first one and have taken away the same appreciation for this character or creature design without having watched other plots.
Yep. Pete, you've watched a lot of crap. This stands above a lot of the stuff that you've subjected yourself to. Having it's like you said, it's been some time and you've watched a lot of stuff since then, stuff that I think you probably could argue is more memorable than Pumpkinhead. But having seen it now, what how did this strike a chord with you?
Like Megan, I'm glad to have watched it again. I wouldn't say that I actively avoided watching this a second time after seeing it so many years ago, but I just remember coming out of it, watching with my cousin, of being like, okay, saw it. It was fair, but don't need to revisit it. happy to do it for the podcast. And I'm glad that I did because I think Blossom, Dick Warlock, Clark Kent,
Richard Warlock, for the record.
Richard Warlock, sorry. Excuse me. Sir Richard the Warlock. And getting to see little Lance Pumpkinson buried at the end, I think, that was a nice touch. My big regret is that I could not work in a joke because the one of the mountain kids, his character's name is Bunt.
Yes.
And I was hoping that he would either sacrifice himself or be sacrificed so that I could use the joke for like sacrifice Bunt. It didn't happen, but I'm shameless enough to just throw it out here out of the podcast anyway. I would have used that joke regardless of whether he was sacrificed or not. And I have used the joke, so I feel good about that.
Perfect.
I'll do my last baseball reference of the evening.
There you go. Since you're a gamer, Megan, I wanted to bring up that the sequel did have a coinciding video game for the PC called Blood Wings, Pumpkinhead's Revenge, that was shortly released after the sequel. And I saw some screenshots of it. I saw like 30 seconds of a playthrough on YouTube. That was about as much as I needed to see. It's basically like a Doom type ripoff. If you told me that it was a fan-made skin of a Pumpkinhead movie using Doom, I would also believe you, but this was an actual like mass market release with a marketing budget and a development budget. But hey, it's 1994. You lean into what the kids like. They like Doom. You get a Doom video game. I mean, a Pumpkinhead video game that looks like Doom. Something that might be a little interesting too on the trivia side. So it was scored by Richard Stone, better known for scoring Animaniacs, Tiny Toons, and Pinky and the Brain. Whoa, why is Pinky and the Brain being mentioned along with 88's Pumpkinhead? I'm like, oh, that's the connective tissue. But nevertheless, sounds good, looks good. I think that's kind of like the story of Pumpkinhead, right? Like, good movie, a little bit forgettable, but, mileage varies.
I do have one question for both of you. When I was looking at the credits, I'm always curious by screenplay credits because, sometimes these things can be kind of like mishmashed and jury-rigged to death when you've got like 10, 12 writers on something. This one had 2. The thing that I pointed out the thing that I noticed was, it was like screenplay by so-and-so with a second name. And you don't see with used a lot when it comes to screenplay. So my question to you is like, what do you think the person who gets the with credit actually contributed to the screenplay? I feel like it's almost like they had the idea of like dirt bikes, or like there was like one element like a screenwriting credit, but I don't.
The flashlight.
The flashlight. I think
totally out of place. I was going to say, for the credits, I'm used to seeing and or an ampersand to designate the level of evenness between the two. I've not seen with, but with almost sounds like, hey, read through this and tell me if this made sense. And they're like, this is a little weird.
Yeah,
maybe
like
change this.
In the room
like, oh, okay, yeah.
While the screenwriter is writing the screenplay, and like, you want in on this? Yeah. How can we do this?
And Kat penned that scientific paper. I don't remember what it is, but somebody had used we throughout all of their official paper, and they didn't want to go through and change it, so they credited their cat as a co-author. And so now as part of it, there's that something which is feline is something as a name that people will use as
a source credit that they'll have to cite. That's amazing. Yes.
Yeah. So it's probably just someone who was sleep talking, and they're like, yeah, beautiful idea. If I don't give you credit for this, well, you listened to me ramble about my Pumpkinhead idea, and you nodded off, started muttering stuff. I'm going to give you credit.
I want to call it pumpkin noggin, but there's something else. It doesn't sound right.
It's the person that told you not yell, oh my gourd, all the time.
That's right.
You got screenwriting credit.
That's how it all comes together. Movie magic, people. That's how it really happens.